But essentially, this talk is just about working from home and helping you successfully make that transition. I'm kind of coming from the perspective of this for folks who were 100% in the office or don't really have any experience working from home whatsoever. So some of this stuff may sound pretty basic to you if you've done this already, or if you've had fairly flexible working conditions. And again, also some of this is just generally productivity tips and not necessarily just for remote working. So I wanted to set that standard first and foremost. As an overview, and I just want to confirm you can still see my slides, right? Okay, good. So we're going to go through kind of three main topics: getting you set up. So essentially, like, how are you going to set up your desk? How are you going to set up where you do the work, as well as what you may need technically to get the work done. We're going to talk then more deeply about actually getting work done, creating routines, discussing communication, talking about virtual meetings. And then the last bit is just going to be talking about taking care of you throughout all of this, which is especially pertinent during this time. So a little bit about me. Go back to my notes. I wanted to make sure, I'm not going to give my whole life story. I mostly just wanted to share my personal experience with working from home. My experience has been very gradual. I've been used to going into an office all the time, and I like the routine that being in an office kind of forced me to have, because I've never really been that great with creating very consistent, rigid routines. And we'll go into that when we talk a little bit more about routines. But I also like the social aspect of being in an office and being around coworkers and being creative together. So in 2015, I was talking with the founder of EM Marketing, who I eventually started working for, and we had worked together before, and so we were just having casual conversations about his business needs and me joining the team. But I had my hesitations because he didn't have an office at the time, and going into an office was really important to me for the reasons that I mentioned. And then, so I guess I eventually convinced him to rent office space, and then he hired me on. And to me, that was great. I was at a point in my life where I wanted to grow professionally. I wanted to interact with a lot of different people. And so being in an office was great. And when we got the office space, I was in the office all the time because of constant meetings and events that I managed. A lot of my day-to-day work actually did consist of helping experienced marketers who worked full-time in an office to transition to freelance consulting, which does lend itself to more remote flexibility. And that's something that these people already wanted, and I coached them through how to have those conversations and negotiations with clients. But as for my own personal perspective, I was in the office pretty much all the time. Eventually, my life circumstances changed, and the company policy was always flexible. So I started staying home more when I didn't have to go into the office. My commute, I had moved a couple of times, and my commute went from 15 minutes to 75 minutes to 100 minutes each way. And so that made going into the office less and less appealing. I was able to transition into being productive at home, and eventually I liked working from home more than working in the office. So, you know, I just wanted to share that experience, mostly just because I know it's a little bit different than what people may be experiencing now. You may have to go kind of cold turkey. And I know, like, for me, the slow transition was very helpful, especially because I didn't want to do it at first. But I know we don't necessarily have the choice here. So I think understanding, like, communication is really key. Having a good open dialogue with your boss and with your colleagues about getting work done and checking in with each other is really important. And understanding that this is a huge disruption to everybody, and your productivity is going to be affected no matter what. Does anybody else want to share some of their experiences with working remotely, or even this transition right now, about what you're experiencing?
I can share. Hey, this is Lauren Moretti.
Hey, Lauren.
Hey, class of 2019 here. You know, I'll just speak candidly. I've talked to Juliet yesterday, and I found, you know, I was previously working from home on a part-time basis, but with such a disruption, um, and I think this is kind of a unique situation with everything going on environmentally. But I've kind of figured out this major disruption going full-time telecommuting, changing environments, changing uh, overall whole community social environments has kind of set the stage to be prone to depression. Um, it was kind of an interesting uh, 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 something I found because originally when this was all kind of starting to come out, things about COVID, and it hadn't really taken off as much yet. My boss took it very seriously, and she said, "Let's do a week testing things out. Testing out if we have the capabilities to work from home." I'm a recruiter, and I work with a company that has a lot of technology that makes it accessible. So, let's give it a week to try. And I was excited in the beginning. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to be so cool. I'm not going to have to deal with the commute every day. And then now I'm on week 4, and I found it's a lot more work to take care of mental, emotional, spiritual health than I originally expected. So that was kind of a realization that I wasn't prepared for.
That makes a lot of sense, and I can relate to that. I mean, I know I'm not going to ask anybody else, but I'm willing to share, like, I in the past have dealt with some depression, and as this change was happening, I mean, I work remotely right now too, but I think the difference in this situation is everyone's kind of forced to make a huge change. It's a huge disruptor in all areas of our life. It's not just you trying out remote work in this one job, but all of the rest of the world is the same. There's a lot of things that are really overwhelming, and there's a lot of things that are changing the way we interact with people. And I also was recognizing, like, I'm sensing these triggers that would in the past kind of lead me into a depressive state. And I mean, thankfully, I've done a lot of work to get through that in the past, where I know what works for me and what doesn't. And I do really think that right now what we're facing is a lot of time for self-awareness and getting to understand yourself and recognizing that now a lot of your needs are your conscious responsibility. I think a lot of our needs were getting met without us even really knowing it. Just physically changing our environment, socially changing our environment, choosing to go out to dinner with a friend versus having to stay home and cook for yourself all the time or get takeout all the time. So I definitely can understand that. And I think, going into the mental health issues is absolutely pertinent at this time. I think I've been pretty pleasantly surprised to see how many resources are being shared for that right now that you may not have really seen for remote workers before this was happening. So thanks for sharing, Lauren.
One more comment. One of the things that I also found difficulty with, you talked about essentially things are outside of our control. One of the things that was difficult, I had this realization one day, and I reached out to my boss, and the idea of the uncertainty, when you reach out to someone and you say, well, how long are we going to be telecommuting? And the answer is for the foreseeable future. That's something hard to kind of wrap your head around. It's different that you're going to telecommute every Thursday, or we're going to do it for the next 2 months. This uncertainty around the foreseeable future is kind of another thing to wrestle with.
Absolutely. And I think we're hearing that in all areas of our lives, right? People who are losing their jobs, they don't know when they're going to get another job. For us who are in the master's program right now, at least this term is remote. We don't know if summer term is also going to be remote, right? There are many things that we don't know what to look forward to and when to look forward to resuming any sort of normalcy, or if we should get used to the fact that this is just now the new normal. And I know some work you can do around that is just working around how can I feel comfortable with unknowns in general? Because I think right now we're just being thrown left and right, all of these unknowns. And that's really difficult to take in. But there, I think, yeah, from what I've been able to do, or like the way I've been able to deal with some of it is just sharing my anxiety around some of these unknowns with other people and hearing their related experiences. And kind of sharing in the fact that, like, well, none of us know, but we all don't know together. and there is some comfort in that a little bit too, right? Does anybody else want to share or have some of their own experiences, their struggles they're dealing with right now?
Yeah, I think for me, like when you guys were talking about the mental health issues, I've also suffered with some mild depression in the past. And I think having a variety in environment is something that really helps me and kind of jumping into new things or different things. That's why I like working at a job that has a lot of variety and getting to meet a lot of people as well. And having that be limited now has definitely been hard. So it's kind of been interesting in a way to find different outlets to have that variety, right? So, like for myself, I've been kind of taking up some art related hobbies like drawing and watercolors, like things that I just haven't done before but have kind of wanted to do. And that's been like kind of scratching a different part of my brain. And it's been kind of nice to have that because I'm not getting to do the usual kind of type of interactions that I really have with people, or even going to different places, or going into the building, or maybe just working somewhere else, or going to a coffee shop. Like all of that stuff is gone now, and that's the kind of stuff that I really, really enjoy doing. And so it's just about finding other outlets now that you can do at home, and different hobbies that foster that kind of need for variety so that I don't tend to slip back into some of that kind of depressive state that like it can happen for me. And that's not to say that every day I'm able to stay ahead of it, but many days I am, and I'm happy for that.
Yeah, that's great. The being creative aspect, I think, is very important. I know I've kind of turned to some of that. I know a couple of friends who have also turned to that. Like we've even started sharing this like virtual dance party thing where we just every day one of us picks a song and we record ourselves dancing to it and just share it with a couple of friends, and then they on their own time dance to that same song. That's just silly things that are just completely meaningless. And it's also like, I know a lot of my friends who are creatives, they have also been trying to use this, okay, like maybe I want to learn guitar, maybe I want to learn piano. It's something I've always wanted to do. Sometimes even that in itself can feel a little overwhelming because you feel this pressure to like, well, I now need to make this a thing. I need to make this a hobby. I need to share this. I need to become a perfectionist at this, or I'm already a perfectionist and I'm going to transfer that into this new thing. And I would say, like, don't pressure yourself. Just do it for you. And you don't have to share any of, like, I'm doing some more creative writing than I normally do, and I'm not sharing that with anybody. Your watercolors, Nikki, I would say, like, oh, I'd love to see that because I love watercolors, but I also don't want to put any pressure on you, So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of ways to kind of channel our interests and find ways to fill our time. That can kind of recharge us and refuel us versus just watching a lot of the news or being on social media, because a lot of that can be more draining than inspiring, right? Okay, I'm going to jump into the next aspect of getting set up. We're going to talk both physical setup and tech setup, like I mentioned. First and foremost, you want to find or create a designated space where you will get your work done. The physical space is important because it helps you create the mental space and the mental separation. You know that when you sit down in this place where you set up your desk, whether it's a real desk or a makeshift desk, and we'll get into that in a second, you know I'm in work mode. I'm getting this done. Just like you said, Dr. Aiken, like from this time to this time, I'm Dr. Righteous. And outside of those hours, I'm mom. Sometimes being in that physical space helps you create those mental boundaries as well. So ideally, you want it to be something where when you step away, you can also mentally step away from your work, that you're not constantly checking emails on your phone at night when you can't fall asleep. But understandable that it is definitely a process. One of the first things I do when I wake up is I roll over and I look at my emails, and I don't respond to any of them, but I look at them. It's a terrible habit. Nobody's perfect. But as far as the physical space, ideally, if you have a quiet, secluded room with ideally plenty natural light, like that would be great. But I understand that like not everybody has that space. I am right now in a space where I thankfully have my own room, but I've done things where I've just worked at the dining table, or I've worked on my bed, or, you know, I've just sat on the floor. You kind of try to make things work. Ideally, you want to make something that is ergonomic and comfortable, because you're going to be spending a lot of hours here, and you may not realize that over time it's going to affect your body in ways if you're not finding the ideal setup. So the ideal setup, like I personally like a harder dining room style chair that has a lightly cushioned seat, because it helps you sit up straight. It helps you, you know, set your back right. And it's also not so comfortable that I'm going to be spending a ton of hours sitting at a time. It's going to remind me like, oh, my butt's getting a little numb. I'm going to go take a break. Another thing is the ideal height of the table that you're going to be sitting at is one that allows your arms to rest at about 90 degrees from the elbow with relaxed shoulders when your back is straight. This is the most ergonomic position to prevent issues such as tense shoulders or carpal tunnel. And also, if you're able to have a separate monitor, elevating the monitor on some books or a stand or something, so that the center of the monitor is parallel to your vision horizontally when you're looking straight ahead, that's the ideal position. That's best for your neck and your back. And your monitor should be at least 12 inches away from your face for the sake of your eyes. And then lastly, for the physical space, I like to say, like, just keep your supplies close. It's pretty straightforward. You should have an idea of what you need throughout the day: headphones, notebook, chargers, just so that you're not scrambling to find it in the middle of a meeting or when you're in the middle of doing something else. If you don't really have a designated space, like I know for me, when I worked at a dining table, I just had like a little basket or a little bag where I just shoved all of my stuff into when I had to clear the dining table for meals or things like that. So that's one option as well. As far as tech goes, internet connection is pretty obvious, and I think most of us probably take for granted our internet speed. But you may realize that if you haven't worked from home before, you may realize that now you're working from home, you don't have as stable of a connection as you would like, or there are tons of other people also using it as well. You may want to consider connecting to an Ethernet cable rather than going over wireless, because that is more stable. It is also more private, and I'll get into that in a second. And you may want to consider upping your internet subscription. And I'm not an internet expert, so don't ask me about speeds or whatever. And if you're also not an expert, you maybe can be able to reach out to your company's IT person, or maybe one of your roommates is more tech savvy, if this is something you also don't really understand. Downloading the necessary software. Kind of, Lauren, you mentioned how your team and your company has a lot of technical tools that are able to help you work remotely. Some of this you may already have on your device, depending on if you're using your personal device or if you're using a work device and you've done remote work before. You may be set up here already. But if you're not, it's helpful to like ask your team, your manager, or the IT department, like, what software is going to be most useful for me being productive? Am I allowed to download this on my personal device or my work device? Sometimes work devices, you don't have the ability to download things, so you may need to work with your IT rep to get through those hurdles. And the last bit on this slide, separate personal from professional. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I also I know I get a little bit more paranoid about this than most people because I used to do industry research for a cybersecurity software company. It was also a litigation support software company. So like the two worst case scenario industries that can make you go really paranoid. And I've definitely become more relaxed over the years, but I do think it's an important topic to bring up. At the very least, you should be looking at your company's handbook. Do they have a personal device policy? Do they have a privacy policy? If you're using a personal device to access work information that you were not already doing before this situation and you didn't sign any special form during this COVID-19 time that addresses this, you may want to check with your HR team, maybe the legal team, because again, in worst case scenarios, if the company gets sued or something happens or your privacy is compromised, you want to make sure you're protecting your personal assets from your professional assets, separating that as much as possible. Again, worst case scenario, but it is possible. We are in a vulnerable time given that everyone is now being almost forced to work remotely in a situation where the company's infrastructure may not have been able to set up privacy protections for that. You know, consider VPN access. Does the company use multi-factor authentication? Things like that. Let's see if there's anything else. I know like some things that you can do pretty easy to separate like personal from professional. Like I've done using separate browsers, internet browsers, like Google Chrome for work and Opera for personal. Or you could even do like if you have two computers, one computer's for work, one computer's for personal, or set up a user on your computer where that's your professional user. And, you know, this is the one I just use for work. You can also set up a Google Voice line if you don't want to use your personal phone number for business calls. There's a lot of tech options out there to keep personal and professional separate. And I know it's kind of a hassle. And I know not everyone's going to be as rigid about that as others. It does depend on your industry. It does depend on what your company may require. So I think it's just important to be aware of that. Any questions or comments before I move on to the next part?
I like the idea of setting up different users on your computer for professional, personal. That's something I'd never thought of before. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've never done that specifically, but I know other people who have. Again, it is based on what do you typically use throughout a workday. Like for me, a lot of my work is on the internet, so for me, just separate browsers is enough. Meaning that like on my personal browser, I'm never logged into my work email. I'm never logged into work systems, things like that. Yeah. Okay. So talking about routine.
I just want to say here, Lauren responded in the chat to say that she set up a little personal mini office, and it changed a lot moving from the couch to an island in the kitchen.
Yeah, I mean, I even myself I can't sit in the same place every day or like all day long too. I sometimes like to change it up and move somewhere else for a little bit, and that's just my personal preference. Okay.
I like that you brought up the point of ergonomics too. I think that's really important. Like I was even straightening my back as you were speaking about that. And just like giving myself like healthy breaks in between different accomplishments that I go through. And then also I like the point that you brought up about lifting the screen as well. So those are some things that I'm gonna.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other resources that you can look to. I mean, they even recommend certain keyboards that are helping your wrists to prevent carpal tunnel. You know, you can either connect that through Bluetooth or through a wire to your monitor or your computer so that you have a better setup. There's a lot of things about ergonomics. Those are like the basics. Those are the only things I know. But I would definitely recommend looking more into it because there are a lot more resources out there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, routines. So the funny thing with the thousands of articles that are out there about successfully working from home, everyone talks about set up a routine, set up a routine. And we all kind of wonder like, well, what does that mean? I mean, it kind of sounds pretty straightforward, but in a time like this, what does that really mean? You know, like I said about me, I've never really been a daily routine kind of person, and I've tried to fight that for so long, but now I've just finally accepted who I am. I'm more of a weekly routine kind of person. And the point here is essentially just making a routine here is really all about just knowing yourself and knowing the best way that you work. And for some people, you may not really know how you work, and going through this process, you're going to figure that out. But I think also for a lot of you people who, if you've been working in the office all the time, now making this big leap to being home 24/7 may feel like withdrawal shock. And my suggestion here is specifically to maintain as similar of a routine as you had when you were in the office. And you may say like, but every day looks so different. And sure, the actual work you get done may look different, and the meetings you have may not be all at the same times every day, but I bet you there are at least a handful of things that you did habitually, whether or not you were aware of it. Like for me, when I used to go into the office, the very first thing that I would do was I'd put on a pot of coffee. And then I'd go back to my desk and I'd look over my emails. And then I would kind of organize my day that way. Also at like 11 a.m., I would get up and I would go get another beverage. These were things that I wasn't aware of doing them at the time, but kind of slowly in my transitioning to working remotely, I would recognize like, oh, there were certain things I did habitually in the office that I didn't do at home. So I would recommend taking a little bit of time to think through, what do my days look like when I'm in the office? Even the tiniest things, like what time would you go to the bathroom? Or when would you go catch up with a coworker down the hall from you? And trying to find ways that you can incorporate that into your remote work, I think will help you make this transition a little bit more easily. Now, obviously, some of these things you can't do, like commuting, unless you want to just go sit in your car for like your 15, 20-minute commute and like listen to music or news or whatever. But you can try to find ways to replace that with something else that might be meaningful and help structure you for your day. I know for me, there are a couple of news podcasts that I like to listen to when I first wake up. You can use this time to maybe do some cooking prep or meditation. And you may want to choose to do something different during your morning commute versus your evening commute. But I would just recommend whatever length of time that your commute was, try and find an activity or something to do that's kind of around that same amount of time. That'll help you kind of ramp up mentally into work and ramp down off of work at the end of the day. And then also recreating office activities, like if you are able to make the same drink that you had at the office, I would recommend doing that at home. You know, it's finding comfort in the little things right now, I think is really important. And of course, checking in on coworkers virtually is always nice. And then just a general productivity tip, wrapping up at the end of the day. It's always nice to go over what did I accomplish and giving yourself time to feel good about the things that you took off your list, as well as what do I still have to work on, and helping set you up for success the next day or the rest of the week. Okay, any questions about that section or comments or ideas, things people want to share? Okay. Next, we're going to talk about communication. You're probably seeing people say this as well, over-communicate. And I think people are saying over-communicate just simply because I don't think we are aware, again, that working remotely, how much less we're going to be communicating over virtual conference, over email, over chat, versus when somebody's sitting right next to you, or you're able to sit physically together in a meeting. Like normally in a meeting, if we were all physically in the same room together and I asked you, does anybody have questions about these slides? You guys be like, no, we're good. But now it's like I kind of just have to sit here and wait if somebody speaks up, right? So being aware that silences does not always necessarily convey what you think you're conveying. So talking more, speaking up more, even if it sounds like little or kind of redundant, I think people are going to appreciate more communication, especially in a time like this, rather than less. I've spoken with so many clients in the past who have rebuffed working with fully remote consultants because the client as a manager feels like they don't really have control over getting the work done. And I'm betting that there's a lot of people who are feeling that right now. There's a lot of managers out there who don't really know how their reports are doing, either in terms of work progress or personally, what other factors are affecting your life right now. So the more that you're able to share, the better everything's going to be, the more smooth everything's going to go. And I also bet that if you're feeling some anxiety about not hearing from people you're working with, even just opting to share with them can help them open up and share back, right? Let's see. So with that being said, be mindful of your own outgoing communication method. There may be times where somebody is pinging you and you're over chat and you're in the middle of working on something. And so you may just need to let them know, like, hey, I can't get to this right now. Or, you know, I'm in the middle of something. It's going to take me a couple of hours. Is that okay? Or do you need a response right now? Especially over chat, there is a sense of immediacy. There is a sense of, like, if you're online, you should be there and you should be able to read my note right away. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But being able to communicate, if you're receiving a message, how immediately you can address that is really important. And then also keeping in mind, like, do you need to send a message over chat versus over email, or versus getting on the phone or setting up a big meeting? Be mindful of what your overall purpose is for what you're communicating and what you're expecting to get out from people, and think through what the best mode of communication is. I know some teams have created remote work profiles where they've shared with their coworkers how they best get work done and what their preferred modes of communication are for different, like, styles of working or for different tasks. If your work requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of communication to get things done, this may be useful to look into, to set up with your team, just so everybody knows what everybody's preferences are, what people are comfortable with. Keep in mind that you may be in a quiet working place and you may be able to hop on the phone at any time, but your coworker may be dealing with 3 roommates and 2 babies and they can't get on the phone because there's just too much background noise. So be mindful of other people's preferences, and of course your existing company culture as well. What have people already been doing? What modes of communication have already been working before this transition? And does that translate well, or do you need to adjust? Any questions here? Okay. Meetings. So I basically just decided to kind of walk through what I think are some best practices before, during, and after a meeting, both for hosts and for attendees. You know, for hosts before a meeting, if there's dedicated tech help, communicate that resource to your team, especially if you haven't already done a bunch of virtual video conferences, or you have to walk through a certain tool that people are not used to having to deal with on their own. Sometimes physically having somebody there to help you troubleshoot something is much more helpful than having to deal with it on your own. And so if there's somebody that they can turn to before the meeting, it's important for them to know who that resource is. And also for hosts, when scheduling meetings, there are various functions and features for scheduling that allow you to, like, automatically mute all attendees, not let them share their videos, not showing attendee names. So that's more for webinars than for internal meetings. But it's great to be mindful of, like, go into whatever web conference function you use, look at what the settings and the features are, and kind of just, again, be mindful of what's the purpose of the meeting and how can these different features help me achieve the goals of that meeting. For attendees, I feel like the tips here are fairly straightforward and obvious. You know, do work prep if needed. When you see a meeting's coming up, do you have to get work done before the meeting is happening? Do you have to present something? Make sure all the tech setup that you have is all ready to go, and that you have the right software and that it's working properly. During the meeting for hosts, it is really important to record. I wouldn't necessarily say every meeting, but especially when a lot of information is relayed back and forth, especially if you know, people's connections are choppy or people are missing out on the meeting. Recording is going to put everyone at ease. You know, if I'm an attendee in a meeting and I have to take lots of notes, I may have missed a couple of things, or my connection might have glitched out for a minute and I may have missed something important, but I don't know. So if I know that the meeting is recorded, I know I can refer back to it all the time. Knowing that somebody else is taking notes as well, or knowing that there's a dedicated note taker, and I have that resource to lean on as well, that's also helpful. And also during the meeting for hosts, this is a really great time to practice your facilitation skills. And I say that more so than regular meetings, just simply because, again, there's a lot of that nuance and a lot of that body language that's lost when you're virtual. Yes, I can kind of see your faces, but I don't know if you're actually looking at my screen or if you're reading something else or if you're engaged, or maybe two people were trying to talk at once and we only heard one person. So it's a great chance to make sure you're giving everyone the opportunity to speak who may need to speak up, whether it's they had an idea that they want to share and they didn't get to share it, or they got interrupted or cut off, or you know, you're doing a round of updates on the team. And so it's important to like call people out when they know they need to be addressed, especially on video conference. People aren't really gonna speak up unless I say like, hey, you Saudi, give us your update, right? Again, you guys have kind of seen this already today in this meeting and probably in other virtual conference meetings, that like, there's just a lot of like, the host will be like, do you guys have any questions? Do you guys have any concerns? And then silence. And I don't have the perfect magic answer for how long you should just be silent to give people the opportunity. It's give or take, right? But just kind of understanding there's going to be some of that awkwardness. And if you're looking for specific responses, be very targeted with your questions. Again, either with the subject of your question or who you're asking it to. Okay, and also it's your job to make sure you maintain control of the meeting. There are going to be the random few people who just love to ramble on and on and on and on, and you're going to have to cut them off. This is true for in-person meetings, but I just wanted to say that in virtual meetings as well, because for some reason, people are much more self-conscious about interrupting each other on virtual conferences. And I'm saying this anecdotally. I don't know if this is actually true, but I've experienced a lot of this. That's why people leverage the chat so much, right? Like they don't want to talk over each other. So it's your job as the host of the meeting to really flex your facilitation skills. For attendees, you know, always stay muted unless you're talking. I always, no matter how many people are in a call, I try to leverage that because everyone appreciates silence and clear communication. No one appreciates the dog barking. Maybe they'll appreciate the cute things that your kids are saying. But it's just to help, you know, make the best use of everyone's time. Stay muted unless you're talking. Also, be mindful that sometimes you think you're not on mute and you're trying to talk and you are muted. So just become really, really comfortable with that mute and unmute button.
Jocelyn?
Especially, yeah.
Hey, I wanted to go back to your point about interrupting. One of the things that I kind of get concerned about when it comes to like interrupting, particularly in those video meetings, is the technology behind it. You know, sometimes it's weird to interrupt because you mix two people at the same time and it doesn't hear the two people at the same time. So, and then you always have that awkward, you go ahead. No, you go ahead, you know? So I think in any situation, in person or online, there's that potential to be awkward, but sometimes just the technology of being online, and like you said, there's that extra component of not being able to see people's body language or other cues. But for me, it's the technology that makes it a little more difficult to jump in and interrupt someone.
Absolutely, yeah, and the delay, sometimes the lag. And so you often hear like people will interrupt each other and then they'll both say, oh no, you go ahead, but they both say that at the same time. And then they both say, oh no, it's okay, you go ahead. And then no one knows how to go, right? No one knows who should go next. And that can, sometimes it sorts itself out between the two people. Other times the facilitator, I would recommend, should jump in and just say, you know what, you go ahead. And then once you're done, we'll let this person go, right? And then it's on the facilitator's responsibility to make sure when person A is done, and if there's any conversation that goes off of that, that then person B still gets their chance to say something, right? And again, that I do think that is true regardless if it's virtual or in person, but you're right that the tech definitely has an effect that you don't have when you're in person. Thanks for sharing that. And thank you for interrupting me. I'm not saying that sarcastically. Okay, and then, so for attendees during the meeting, introduce yourself briefly. And this mostly is like for meetings where we don't know everyone who's on the call, or really large, like maybe all large team or department, or even all company meetings. If you're gonna speak up, it's really important to introduce yourself just briefly. Say like, hey, I'm Jesselyn, I'm in the marketing department, and I just wanna say XYZ. That's helpful because it gives people the chance to put the face to the name. And then if they have more to talk about after that, or they're trying to address what you spoke about, they can address you directly. They could say, hey, Jesselyn, that was a great idea. Or, you know what, Jesselyn, I don't really agree with you. And it reminds us that we're talking to humans, right? And in addition to that, trying to use your video is feasible. Again, it does depend on your internet connection. I'm making a big risk using my video. It's been working, but my internet connection here has been kind of wonky. It, again, just reminds people that you're present and you're a human and you're actually engaged. So it kind of goes two ways. One, when your video is on, it shows everyone else that you're engaged and you're here and you're present. Two, when you're on camera, you're trying to be more engaged because you know you're on the spot. Granted, I know that can give some people anxiety, but I would recommend holding yourself accountable to that when you know it's an important meeting and it's something that I really need to pay attention to. And if you're not on video, try to be more vocal, whether it's on chat or on audio, to let people know that you're there and that you heard them. This is really important, again, because people can't really see what's going on. I know I've been guilty of being in meetings where I'm responding to emails, or I'm texting, or I'm taking notes about something else. We've all been guilty of that. But I think it's just really important now that all of our meetings are virtual, don't slip into those habits that are going to take you away from being productive and being present. Okay, after the meeting, for hosts, you know, I just think timely follow-up is really crucial, especially if there's a lot that was covered in the meeting, or again, people's connections were bad or people missed it. Share the notes, make sure everyone who had an action item is aware of what the action item is and when it is due. Also make time to address any questions that couldn't be answered during the call. And let's see, what else? Yeah, check in with those who may have missed the meeting or were not able to make it, whether that was a personal reason or a professional reason, and make sure that whatever was agreed to and decided in the meeting, if it affects their work, make sure that they're on board with it as well. And for those who were attending the meeting, recap your takeaways and to-dos, follow up on any questions that you didn't have the chance to address. And I put a link, we can share the slides at the end of this, but I put a link at the very bottom of the slide that I just saw on LinkedIn yesterday by Stephen Rogelberg, where he did a little video on 10 quick tips to make remote meetings work. He's the author, some of you know, of The Surprising Science of Meetings. He's been studying meetings and how to be effective in meetings for, I think, like over 15 years or something like that. He's a great resource right now. And he's been doing a lot of extra work helping people make this transition. Okay. Lastly, we're going to talk about taking care of you throughout all of this. This is kind of in terms of, again, productivity, also just balance in general, but also being mindful of the times that we're in. So is it Yuji, or how do you pronounce your name? Ujjaini?
Ujjaini.
Say that one more time.
Ujjaini.
Ujjaini, thank you. My connection was a little off. Ujjaini, thank you. Yeah, you mentioned the importance of taking breaks. This is really important for productivity. And remember that, like, you're not in an office, you didn't have to commute, you didn't have to walk up flights of stairs or down long hallways to get to your desk or the bathroom or the break room. Like, you're reducing your movement significantly. So just remembering to take breaks to just get up and stretch, go get water or a snack, to rest your eyes, it'll all do wonders for your health and your productivity. There are apps or browser extensions out there where you can set up reminders for yourself during certain intervals to take breaks. When I worked in an office, I used to have a rotating like 20-minute reminder that reminded me a series of things. And for me, one of the biggest things is for my eyes, the 20-20-20 rule. If you're not aware of that, it's essentially for every 20 minutes you are looking at a screen, you should look away from your screen to something at least 20 feet away or further for at least 20 seconds. I have terrible eyesight, and so I'm trying my best to not go blind. And so for me, that's a really important one. So that's a good one. You know, every hour you should probably get up and walk around for 3 to 5 minutes, taking a longer break maybe during lunchtime or later in the afternoon to get more physical activity is definitely helpful. I also make a point to stretch my shoulders and neck. I know that can get pretty tense if I've been sitting down at my desk for a long period of time. And then also reminders to fix your posture. So there are ways that tech can help you remember. Trying to think what some of them were. Well, I think I deleted those notes. So if you guys want some tips on specific tools or browser extensions, I can look those up and get back to you on that. Sticking to your schedule, you know, it's just as important to focus on work when you agreed to and you communicated you would. It's equally, if not more important, to stop working when you plan to. You know, especially if you have loved ones at home, they'll appreciate when they know they'll get to spend quality time with you. And when they have a specific window of time to look forward to, they'll respect your scheduled work time more, with the caveat of, I don't have kids, so I don't have personal experience, so I'm assuming that's not as true, though Aiken, you kind of mentioned there is some way to work around it, maybe like playing a character, saying, at this time, I am Dr. Righteous, and then at this time, I'm Mom, right? Finding ways to hold yourself accountable, not just to yourself, but the people that your schedule might be affecting is super crucial. Plus, shutting off work when you said you would is going to help you be more energized when you get back to work or when you engage in other things rather than feeling exhausted. Balancing the other priorities like family, school, or other work, like we all have other things going on in our lives that require our attention. And my best advice here is to just try and chunk out the same time in your routine as you did when you were going into the office. So if you use lunch breaks to catch up on school assignments or work on your side hustle or whatever it was that you were doing, try to do that at the same time of your day as well. Staying virtually social, you know, I'm sure a lot of you are already doing this. I've been doing virtual happy hours with friends, playing games online, just calling to catch up with people, eating healthy. I think it's really tempting to, you know, just wander into the kitchen because it's right there and there's so much food and you might be bored or you may just feel a little bit of hunger. Some ways to help temper that is to do some meal prep or set aside snacks that are portioned out already so that you know what you can eat. And then I think lastly, the really important one is just be kind. There's inevitably some shift in timing that is going to happen in this new routine for you, for everyone else in your house, for everyone else at your job too. Some work may need to be done asynchronously, assuming that your employer is okay with that. But just be mindful that things are shifting and we're all going through this at the same time. Don't beat yourself up over not getting it perfectly right now. Don't get yourself beat up over not ever getting it perfect. Just be kind to yourself and be kind to everybody else that is going through this as well. I have some additional resources that you guys can look at when I share the slides that are specifically timely for right now. And then lastly, I just wanted to share some photos and memes that I thought were relevant, kind of reminding us that we're all in this together. You'll see like working desks that were made out of a cardboard box next to a kid who's also doing some art. There's somebody who created a standing desk out of an ironing board. And then even this guy who's pretending he's on the bus going to work in his bathroom. But yeah, so that's everything I have for you guys. I know we only have like 5 more minutes. but would love to hear questions, thoughts. I see people seem to be sharing some resources in the chat as well. Anything else?
One thing I want to add is a personal challenge that I have been trying to figure out. As wonderful as it is that I'm getting to spend more time with my spouse now, it can also get annoying because I am not used to him being in my space this much, and vice versa. And I work remotely most of the time. I've been working remotely the past 6 months, so I'm used to my space being my space. So it was definitely a challenge when I've seen him more being at home. Or it's great the first week, it's great the second week, but then you see that that space that you've created for yourself, now there's someone else in it. And I think it's important to communicate if you're feeling that way with your spouse and or with your partner, whoever it is that shares that space with you at home. And also, you may have meetings at the same time you may have meetings. So it's just good to figure out your schedules first thing in the morning so that you can go sit in different rooms around that time or give each other that space that they need, even though it's great being together in the same house. I think that's something that I had a little bit of challenge with, but definitely try to navigate through it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I was focusing this a lot on like, how is this disrupting your work life, but not so much about how is this disrupting your personal life. And I know people who like, I know a couple that works in a studio apartment. They're both remotely right now. They both are on meetings. What do? Sometimes one of them goes into the bathroom. The other one goes into the closet, right? And that's not to say what that does to the connectivity, right? So again, like just as you're communicating with everybody at work, communicate at home. Like I'm going to have, like I told my uncle just now, like I have to host this meeting. Is it possible for you to not use the internet? And he said, okay, I'll go to the grocery store. And I said, okay, don't touch anybody. But yeah, so definitely that extra level of communication.
Absolutely, like explicit space negotiation. So Sakina and I have a schedule where until about 3 to 3:30, the downstairs is mine. And she kind of stays in her room, and she likes that. This was again, it was like an explicit negotiation. I'm a morning person, she's an evening person. So till 3 to 3:30, I'm downstairs. I can work. I have my quiet time. She's not in my space. I'm not in her space. We have breakfast together, and that's it. Then around 3:30, we transition. If I still have to work, I go upstairs to my room. And she's downstairs and she can do her thing and she can move around easily. When I have to take calls, I let her know where so I can move around in space that she does not need so she can still access the parts of the house that she needs. But it is like we have a routine negotiation, so we each have our alone time as well as our time together, because like we both are two big personalities. We do not need to be spending that much time around each other. It would be like detrimental to our quality of our relationship. So, but that explicit negotiation and renegotiation, I think is just critical, which y'all were already saying. So I'm just seconding. Oh, interesting. That's a great question. And I'm going to have to pop up, by the way. So thank you, Jesselyn. I'm going to my next meeting. This was wonderful. I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Minutes. Well, I see Crystal has one.
Yeah.
I know they're still going.
So Crystal just put in a question into our chat here that says, end of the workday transitions back to family life. So are there any thoughts or ideas or suggestions, comments, anything on that?
I have some, but I'd love for other people to jump in before me.
So one of the things that I think would be useful is to have something that you do to tell your brain that you're transitioning. So just this is not something that we do right now, but this is actually something that I used to do when I lived at home with my parents, like growing up. So that was, when it was normal, non-quarantine time. But like my dad would go to work and stuff and come back, and then I would go to school and come back and everything. And then in the evening, like right as we were getting ready to kind of like settle into evening and dinner and everything, we would have like an early evening tea. And essentially we just like sit down and drink a cup of tea together. It takes like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, something like that. And we just kind of talk about our day. And then that was, I didn't realize it at the time, but now that I think about it, it really was to my brain, like showing me that, oh, okay, now it's time to like relax and like wind down for the day. So to have like some little ritual that you do that kind of just tells your brain, like, okay, like I am done working and now it's time to relax and spend time with my family or cook or do something else. So for us, it was, an evening tea, but it might be, just going and sitting outside on a patio or a deck for just a few minutes or something like that, where just 20 minutes, I think, is all it takes, some kind of process that has that signal to your brain.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to mention, I don't know if you saw that earlier in the talk, but I was talking about replacing the commute, right? Trying to be mindful of how much time was that, because we may have underestimated how much of a mental preparation that commute was for going to work and coming back from work. And I also think it's be mindful that that transition from work to family life may not be as clean as it used to be, as like walking through the door at the end of the workday. I know for me, sometimes I may not be as focused at work, and I see like, oh, I need to fix or like do my laundry, or I need to do this or something. And I may just take a note of the things at home that I know that I want to get done, but I don't want it to interrupt my workday. So I can use that list of things that I want to do when I know that I'm done for the day to start transitioning. Okay, now I have this idea of things to get done to remind me, like, I'm at home now, I'm done with work. So that may be another idea for you as well. I know we're over time, so I want to be mindful of it for everyone. I know there are people who already dropped off, but I do want to say thank you, you guys, for coming, and thanks for being so interactive. This was really fun for me, hearing your experiences and your ideas. We'll share the slides at the end and any other notes that people have shared as well. I'll share my contact information. I love to connect with everyone and anyone, so feel free to reach out to me at any time.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Very helpful. And
Awesome.
thank you for all
Okay.
the discussion as well.
Yeah, thanks everybody. All right, have a great afternoon, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.